Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest, Remarkable Books, number 68. The first book today is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, 2003. This is one of the best books I've ever read. It is set in Afghanistan and the United States. The character, this is a novel. Amir is the main character. He grows up as a rich Pashtun, that's an ethnic group, in Kabul, Afghanistan. And he grows up with Hassan. His secret half brother, son of the servant, a lowly Hazara. Hazara is another ethnic group, apparently of low status. The Pashtuns are, I think, the most powerful, influential ethnic group in Afghanistan. The Hazara, very poor and weak. And his father had an affair with the servant and fathered this child. And then, so Amir and Hazara grew up together. And although it wasn't, apparently he didn't know that he was his half brother. And so, they were childhood friends and actually brothers. And this Hassan was a really good guy. And one of the things they were doing was these kite competitions where they would have these, they would basically have flying kites, and there was I think they would attach glass, small pieces of glass to the string, and you try to cut the other strings. And in this scene, I think Hassan had won this kite racing. And Hazara went to retrieve the kite, and there were some bad boys, and who surrounded him in an alley in Kabul, Afghanistan, and they sodomized him, meaning he was homosexually raped. And Amir actually came and saw what was going on and panicked, and he ran away. He didn't help. Terrible thing. And then later, this Hassan was a really good guy. He'd been raped, horrible, and he was bleeding. And he came home, and Amir felt so guilty about it that he ended up hating Hassan, and he pressured his father to send Hassan away, which his father did. And then later, Amir and his father fled Afghanistan during the Russian invasion. They had to get out. It wasn't safe. A lot of Afghans were leaving. This is, started in December of 1979, and then I think they left probably 1980. It's a historical novel, but the author is an Afghan American. So they moved to the United States and started a new life. And, he became he had this childhood. I think he was maybe 12 when they left Afghanistan, and so he was living the American life. And then years later, he decided during the Taliban, and he felt so guilty about what he had done, and that his friend's hour of need, and he didn't help him, and not only didn't help him, but after this terrible crime, he had rejected him. Horrible. So he felt very, very guilty, and he years later, during the Taliban era, Amir returned to Afghanistan because he learned that there was a child that Hassan had a son named, and his name was Sohrab, who had become a child sex slave of the Taliban. And, he wanted to get him out of the country. It was very dangerous because, the Taliban were really, really bad, and this is before 9/11. And if you watch the movie, it's really something where this guy, and it's horrible what this boy, he's like a homosexual, or forced into being he's molested, and he's homosexually raped by these Taliban leaders. And in the scene, if you watch the movie, there's a wonderful movie about it, and he really risks his life, Amir, and because he can't do anything for his old friend who's died, but he can do something for his son, and he almost gets killed himself. And in this scene, this boy who kind of sees what's going on, he actually has a slingshot, and he let's fly with this slingshot right into this bad Taliban guy's eye. It goes right into his eye. So the guy is really disabled. And to make a long story short, he was able to get this boy out of the country. It was very dangerous, and he himself was very badly hurt in this incident, fighting this guy who was going to kill him. And so he brings the boy back to California. He didn't have any children, and he and his wife raised this child. And then they're having a family gathering, and his uncle comes. And Afghans are very respectful of their elders, traditional culture. And then his uncle says, why do you have this Hazara boy? What are you doing with this Hazara boy here? And, because he's prejudiced, this ethnic pride. He's Pashtun, and he thinks, the Hazara are lowly people. And then Hassan, his nephew, he stands up to him. He says, he is my son, or something like that. He says, and he says, you will not refer to him to a Hazara boy again. In other words, this is America, and anyway, there's right and wrong, and it's wrong the way the Hazara are treated in Afghanistan. And anyway, he's not going to tolerate it in America. So he stands up to his uncle and really violates Afghan culture. So, and then the uncle's kind of surprised, but he does the right thing because the boy deserves respect, and he's had a very tough childhood. This is an incredible novel, historical novel. I believe Khaled Hosseini's written about maybe 4, and I think I read all 4. They're very, very good. And ever since 9/11 and the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, 17 years ago, Afghanistan has become an important country for the U.S. A lot of the U.S. troops have served over there, and now we've been so now there's an interest in the country, and the historical novels by Khaled Hosseini have done a lot of good. He writes extremely well, and it really helps you get to know the country better. This country that we're now tied to, because of the war, and it's ongoing since the U.S. is still in Afghanistan, the U.S. military. So I highly recommend this book and the other books by Khaled Hosseini, this tremendous Afghan-American historical novelist. The next book is Stalin, The Court of the Red Tsar by Simon Sebag, Montefiore, 2003. This is a tremendous book, outstanding. It's the life of Joseph Stalin, born in 1879, died in 1953. He was the leader of the Soviet Union for more than 30 years, I believe, and some consider the most evil man in history. A guy who, Hitler ruled Germany, and then much of Europe. Germany for 12 years, and then much of Europe for about 5 years. But Stalin, oh my gosh, I don't know how many millions of, maybe 30 million people, 20 million people murdered under his government. He had a meeting with Winston Churchill and FDR during the Second World War, and Churchill said to him, quote, that God was on the side of the Allies in World War II. Stalin replied, and the devil's on my side. The devil is a communist, and God's a good conservative. I think there's wisdom in that. There was one story. There was a filmmaker in the Soviet Union making a movie about Ivan the Terrible, who was Stalin's hero. Ivan the Terrible was a czar, going back maybe the 1300s, 1400s, something like that. And Stalin reportedly told him to show how Ivan needed to be cruel. Ivan the Terrible was a really, really bad guy. He killed a lot of people just because he wanted to do it, because he was miserable. And so, in my opinion, Joseph Stalin led a government of demons in the Soviet Union. They were demons. What they did. They had power, and they thought, we can do whatever we want. The biggest fraud in history, the Soviet Union, which, sold itself as creating a world brotherhood, and the best, government in history where there was equality and no poor people and everything, and it was a biggest fraud in history. Stalin led the Soviet Union from 1929 to 1953, so that's 34 years. He promoted the USSR as building a world brotherhood while murdering 20 million people. And he was the hero of leftists in the West. I know my mother, in high school in the late 30s, she wrote a paper about Joseph Stalin that was positive. And it wasn't until really after his death, Nikita Khrushchev, who was his successor and who really published the crimes and was open about, and that actually led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. But yeah, all these people in the West who in the 1920s and 30s and thought he was wonderful, Joseph Stalin, that he was doing all this good, helping. It was all a lie. It was a lie. And these guys, they had power, Stalin and others, and they just did whatever they wanted. And the amount of suffering that they inflicted on the Russian and other Soviet peoples, other ethnic groups, is just beyond belief. The Gulag Archipelago, and this is something to keep in mind. Those who believe, people who are leftists now, who want, let's expand the government, make it bigger and bigger, and then we'll end up like the Soviet Union, where we'll lose our freedom. Do we want that? I don't think so. We're going to regret it if it happens. So let's not let that happen. This is really something. It's very troubling. And these guys, they thought, whatever we do is right, and let's do this and let's do that, and arrest anybody who objects. The founder of the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin, at one point somebody said to him, well, this isn't right, or this is, we have to. And Lenin, famously said, well, morality has nothing to do with it. So when you eliminate the idea of God, which communist governments attempt to do, and you eliminate morality, then what are you left with? The exercise of power through whim, and people just indulging in cruelty and enjoying power. And all those fellows who were part of Stalin's entourage, they all went down. They were all betrayed and they got what they deserved because, God's justice, the law of karma is true. Whatever we do comes back to us. So this is a very important book of this fellow, Joseph Stalin, in the 20th century, and what he did. And it's really something we should face, no matter how painful it is and tragic. The next book is Martha Washington, An American Life by Patricia Brady, 2005. Wonderful book. Martha Washington, the first lady, wife of George Washington, she was a really good person. And she was George Washington's best friend. And during the American Revolution, George Washington kept up the morale of the Continental Army, which was facing overwhelming challenges of not being paid and not having enough to eat and even freezing and not having clothes. Martha kept up the morale of George. In fact, she would spend every winter in the American Revolution, she would come and spend it with the army, and not only keeping up her husband's morale, the leader of the revolution, the military leader of the Continental Army, but she did a lot of good meeting with the wounded and with the sick. And, she was a good person, really good person, and she should be remembered as playing a vital role in American history, because, George Washington needed support and needed her friendship and her love. And she was a very good person, and they were very good friends, and she needed him, and she's they used to call her the secret weapon of the American Revolution, and she's certainly a hero or heroine who needs to be remembered, who did an awful lot of good for our country because of how much she helped George Washington, the father of the United States. So I highly recommend this book, and God bless Martha Washington, a woman who served her country well. The next book is The Real Thomas Jefferson, The True Story of America's Philosopher of Freedom by Andrew M. Allison, National Center for Constitutional Studies, 1983. This is a super terrific book, and the book this book is straightforward, positive, and chronological, and gives the facts of Thomas Jefferson's amazing life. The Declaration of Independence, religious freedom, the University of Virginia. His accomplishments. Declaration of Independence, the words, all men are created equal, that changed the world. Religious freedom, which Jefferson championed, and which meant that people from different religions came to America. Various Protestant religions, Protestant Christians, Catholic Christians, Jewish people, and eventually Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims and so forth. And in America, they've all been able to practice their their religion in freedom, and that's been unique. Because other countries, there's been a lot of suppression and persecution of religious minorities, which has been problematic for those countries. But in America, we've gotten so many talented people have come here and contributed because of religious freedom, and we didn't waste time fighting each other. And then, of course, education. Jefferson believed in learning his whole life. He loved to learn himself, and he's the father. He helped create the University of Virginia. And I find his life is very inspiring because of his own dedication to learning, and really an amazing life. God bless Thomas Jefferson, a man who served his country well. The next book is John Adams, Party of One by James Grant, 2005. Another wonderful book. This is 450 pages, and it does a very good job of going through John Adams' life chronologically, which I find very helpful. I took a lot of good notes from it. The Colossus of American Independence. Now, John Adams is, again, another forgotten guy, a guy who created a lot of enemies because, he helped change public opinion, and people didn't appreciate it, those who were against the American Revolution or who were ambivalent. But his efforts, his writing, his speeches were key in public opinion changing to supporting the war. He really lived an amazing life of public service, and he's a founding father of America. Did an awful lot of good, helping to secure French support in the war, which was decisive, and French naval support, which was key at the Battle of Yorktown, Virginia, the battle that won the war. God bless John Adams, a wonderful book. The next book is The Jefferson Lies by David Barton, 2012. Wonderful book. The author makes a strong case that Thomas Jefferson did not have an intimate relationship with Sally Hemings, and that he was a strong Christian, a good man. It's been fashionable in recent decades, probably since the 1960s, to be anti-American and to debunk or to say all these men and women who have been considered heroes over the years, it's become popular to say, oh, they're no good. And there are those who say, oh, look at Thomas Jefferson was a bad guy. He owned slaves, and he fathered children with this woman who was an African American slave, Sally Hemings, and therefore he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy, and then he took advantage of this woman, and basically he mistreated her. You could. So anyway, this David Barton, he's a conservative and trying to, this book is a defense of Thomas Jefferson, so I think it's a very good thing because we need to believe in something. We need to believe in our country, and it comes down to attitude. There is good and bad. Thomas Jefferson wasn't perfect. He died bankrupt, and yes, he did own slaves, and he really didn't try to end slavery. So, but he did an awful lot of good, and if very often I think our big problem in the United States today is a bad attitude. We don't. It's like we're like spoiled teenagers who have good parents and don't realize it. Because they don't know. We don't know what it's like in other countries very often, and we don't know that this is a good country, and that Thomas Jefferson is a hero that we can be proud of and played a major role in American history. The next book is 1776 by David McCullough, 2005. And David McCullough is one of my favorite American historians. This is a wonderful book. He gets into the battles of Lexington and Concord with Massachusetts, the very beginning of actually that was in 1775. The liberation of Boston in early 1776. The Declaration of Independence, when to use a reference to Julius Caesar, we crossed the Rubicon. July 4th, 1776. The fall of New York City, very traumatic. Not long after the Declaration in August. And then, the things looked really bad. And the big comeback at Trenton, New Jersey in December of 1776, a victory that we really, really needed. And that's why the famous painting, Washington Crossing the Delaware, is so important, even if it's not historically accurate. So these very important men, George Washington was the big leader. Henry Knox, the guy who came up with the idea of dragging cannons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston, which led to the liberation of Boston. Nathaniel Greene, one of the top generals of George Washington. So that dramatic year in American history, 1776, a lot happened. And I really recommend this book. And David McCullough is amazing. He's a really good guy, amazing historian. The next book is George Washington's Secret Six, The Spy Ring That Saved the American Revolution by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager, 2013. Of course, Brian Kilmeade is on Fox News. He's on what they call the Five. This is a wonderful book. During the Revolutionary War in the United States, New York City was the British headquarters, actually throughout the war, especially after they abandoned Philadelphia. And George Washington had a spy ring there, which brought him vital intelligence. It was a dangerous, nerve-wracking work. So plenty of New York City references in this book: Staten Island, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and those poor fellows. Because if they got caught, it would be death. And they performed a very important work for the Revolution, for Washington, getting him information which he needed, which you need in any war. What's the enemy doing, so you can anticipate and prepare. So these are heroes in American history, and so these two authors, Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager, did a really good job in bringing that aspect, that part of the American Revolution to life. The next book is Founding Brothers, The Revolutionary Generation by Joseph J. Ellis, 2000. So this is the story of Alexander Hamilton versus the Aaron Burr duel in which Hamilton died, the tragic issue of American slavery, George Washington's farewell. That would be during the after the war ended, and of course he came back, became president. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson's partnership, conflict, and renewed friendship. Also James Madison and Benjamin Franklin. So, they talk about, you've heard of the familiar expression, the Founding Fathers, and this fine author, Joseph J. Ellis, has written a lot of wonderful history books. The title of Founding Brothers, that he's talking about their relationships with each other, which was very important. And they had their differences. Politics is controversial and it's debatable. What should government do in different times, and probably the best part is how John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, they worked together and then they became enemies because of political differences, and but then became friends again near the end of their life and died the same day. And these other important guys, James Madison, who is really the clock spring of the U.S. Constitution, Benjamin Franklin, who was in Europe and did a lot of good in helping to get France to join the war. Outstanding book by Joseph J. Ellis, Founding Brothers. The next book is A Talented Nation Moment, The Death of Liberty, When Talents Are Lost by Don Allen Rico, 2014. I finished this book in Emmett, Idaho. The author is the founder of iSaber TV, and which actually hasn't become operational yet. I was supposed to have a program called American History with Peter Ray, and that didn't come through. But anyway, this book has good ideas about how to live a successful life. In fact, the work that I did preparing talks on U.S. presidents for this internet cable TV channel, which hasn't been operating, led me to produce them myself on YouTube. So this is a fine book by a friend of mine, Don Allen Rico. The next book is The Whore of Akron, One Man's Search for the Soul of LeBron James by Scott Raab, 2011. Yeah, this is a pretty good book. I don't like the title, but the author is a Cleveland sports fan who at age 12 was at the 1964 NFL title game at former Cleveland Municipal Stadium, which has been demolished. Now it's where First Energy Stadium is, in Cleveland, when the Browns won the 1964 NFL championship. So this book is all about his life as a Cleveland sports fan. Red Right 88 when the Browns lost in 1980 in the playoffs, lost a tough game against Oakland. The Drive, and 1986 AFC Championship game against the Denver Broncos, which we lost. The Shot, when Michael Jordan beat the Cavs in the playoffs, I believe in '89. The Fumble, in 1987 playoff AFC title game. Ernest Biner's fumble. Now this book focuses on LeBron James leaving the Cavs for the Miami Heat. It's very well written. He's honest about himself being overweight, having a drinking problem, finding a good wife, and joy in fatherhood. And so he was pretty hard on LeBron. Actually, I think overly hard. Obviously, the title. I found the title painful. Didn't even want to take a look at it, but it's a good book about a perspective of this fellow, this Cleveland sports fan, and so forth. The next book is The Great Upheaval, America and the Birth of the Modern World, 1788 to 1800 by J. Winnick, 2007. This J. Winnick is a tremendous historian. He talks about the events in Russia, France, and the United States, so these three countries during that 12-year period at the end of the 1700s. This is an incredible book. He talks about Catherine the Great, who was the Tsarina, the leader of Russia, and was actually German, married into the Russian royal family, and then won a power struggle with her husband, who was no good. The French Revolution. Yeah, that was really something. That was started late, I think in 1787. The U.S. Constitution and the presidencies of George Washington and John Adams. Winnick writes this about Catherine the Great. The internal institutions of a country should always develop in accord with the character of that country. So, every country, like they say, every country has the government it deserves. And this is, I think, what has made it challenging for countries to have democracy when the culture maybe has too much ethnic conflict or not enough maturity in the public. The description of the Ottoman Sultan's palace in Istanbul is overpowering, unbelievable. Oh my gosh, the wealth and sort of really luxury there. I read it out loud. I read that passage out loud to my friend Brent Lessheim because it was so incredible. How the French Revolution turned into a disaster, but the American Revolution stayed good. The French became atheists, and this, I think, was their downfall. Of course, they had bigger problems because of their past. They were haunted by their past, and we didn't have that problem as a nation of immigrants. The rule of law, reason, and goodness. To be reasonable, just, patient, firm, and benevolent. So I really recommend this book. Wonderful book. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you find a good history book to read. There's so many out there, and just keep looking if you can't find any. So anyway, God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.